Thank you for tuning in to this transmission of all things cognitive, creative, and imaginative. This is Runehammer. The Rangers of Numidia, The Talking Head, by Brandish Gilhelm. Of the few survivors of the calamity at Westburg, that supernatural flood that swallowed the town whole, none are more well chronicled than the Rangers of Numidia. This name they did earn venturing north to employ old Grey Elk and his Numidian company. With this alliance secured in blood, fighting side by side against the unnatural dire wolves of that forbidding steppe, their purpose was made one. Together, they would venture back around the high fells of the Greenway's rim, to the grim mists of Frogwood. Here Garrett Frack had absconded, demons in tow, to weave what he called his grand spell. Of this, many details were at their disposal, for poor Zymer had acted as the warlock's researcher, and unwittingly played his part in the dark pact that laid low all in Westburg, not slain by the flood. And so they went, south through the wolves, lower and wide there do the hills splay, and Frogwood was in sight in 3 days' walk. "It's death to tread the bogs by night," Grey Elk muttered. The group, 8 of them in all, surveyed the muddy lowlands from a rocky jut, 2 bow shots up. "What say you, Helm?" Helm was tired. The man was armed to the teeth, wearing full plate and ringmail tassets like a warhorse. Still, he stood tall as an oak and scanned the bog for trails or hidey holes. Fiends do their work by moonlight. He turned to Grey Elk, who was his elder, placing one gloved hand on the man's pauldron. "We enter by dawn's glow." "Aye," Grey Elk agreed, and there they crouched down. They took no fire, no crispy eye or bacon, cold stout gar and a bit of tack was all each man could nibble. Now, this moment, a quiet before a storm, is a good time to remind you, my dear reader, of the members of this noble company. Heroes all, and proven in more battles than many give them credit, even in history's kind eye. There was Zymer, the sage, old as time and wise to match, then Helm, their spearman, that hero mysteriously eulogized in the cavern of the lizard men. And at the watch stood Grey Elk, a huge man with braided beard and wolf's fur cloak. Despite Grey Elk's vigilance, the goblin called Stills lurked below the rocky outcrop, wary and invisible as black smoke. Always at his side, just as quiet and twice as fast, was the fox they had rescued in the flood. Foxy they named her, but she answered only to danger and valor's call, never her dubbed name. Beyond these, there were 3 of Grey Elk's battle-axers. Taller even than their chief, and darker in the eyes, these 3 stayed at the fore of the camp. The men never seemed to rest, standing like stone trolls above the gloom. Their names they kept to themselves, and time has blurred them, save their deeds and deaths. "We'll find Frack at the heart of the swamp," Zymer murmured, leaning his head against a pillow of cold granite and crossing his arms. It was cold, even here in the lowlands. "He'll be replicating his forsaken servants. He means to build an army of the misshapen devils. Then we'll clumsy them up with shields," Grey Elk answered, chewing. "I'd rather meet ghouls than giant wolves any day." Helm nodded, sitting on a stump, hands on knees. His arsenal was leaned at his side. His eyes darted. That dark night slid by, one small hour at a time. The moon was bloated and greenish, and drums vibrated in the distance. The folk of the Greenway would never even know of their dooms if they fell here. The swamp would eat them with a wet, bottomless rot. Dawn made pink the east, and hope lifted again. Stills was already ahead, scouting side to side with Foxy, flitting from log to stone and trunk like ghosts. Every now and then the little goblin, only his eyes visible in the murk, would signal to the group, left, right, hold a moment, dead on, and so forth. This way they made their path, and quickly they found their quarry. There was no mistaking it. Stills, his squished little face in shadow, and the rest of him gillied with camouflage, made a gesture of 4 fingers and pointed to the left of the scene. There hunched were 4 unarmed men, rags for garb, hollow black eye sockets, and reddish gills or a sort of fins at their necks. Frack's creations. Beyond that fishy guard post was the den of evil they dared, a wattle and daub longhouse, but sort of slumped or poorly built. Its roof beams were simply stripped tree trunks, but of poplar or alder, hardly straight. Sharpened poles skewed at random from the lumpy walls, and where proper windows should have been, only odd round holes glowed from within. The hum of chants was muffled. "Those 4 won't be the only guard," Zymer whispered, staying low, "and we're likely to face Sahagwin before we reach the sanctum." The drums began again. The chanting escalated. "What are we waiting for, then?" Grey Elk grumbled. He had a bear arrow nocked. These were huge oak shaft arrows with barbed heads, almost as long as a man is tall. He meant to make the most of his opening shot. "There," Helm answered, pointing his hand axe. From behind the longhouse shambled a thing of nightmare. The dawn light hated its form, and it seemed to resent the growing light in return. It was bipedal, but 10 feet tall at least, hunch with a massive trunk, and atop it, mostly mouth head of some kind, from a primordial ocean abyss. The lidless yellow eyes twitched, reflecting torchlight with weird inner refractions, and then it hissed. The mouth opened wide, and beyond rows of little teeth, the hiss came forth, airy and low, slow and awful. The 4 guard things responded to this hideous sound, turning, heading back that way. The rangers had an opening, with all but the huge beast turning their backs. "Hold," Grey Elk said, standing upright and drawing his massive antler bow with a creak. "This could be a damn good shot, if Udin wish it." Helm, Zymer, and the axemen were poised to spring. Stills was spinning one dagger on his index finger nearby, grinning like a fool and waiting for the arrow to fly. Foxy was off in some hollow, unseen. Now here's where the tale turned from a typical barroom boast to one of the oddest yarns in Alfheim. Sorcery, by definition, is never what it seems, or even what it should be. It takes forms as wild as the waves and feral as a brush fire. Magic was thick in the air that early morning, and the valor of our heroes was all that stood between those dark convulsions of energy and our fragile mortal world. Thwack! Grey Elk loosed his bear arrow with unerring skill. The massive projectile pierced not 1 but 3 of the misshapen guard things. The barbed arrowhead exploded through the third's neck with a red splash, spattering the huge creature beyond. Before it could howl with fury, the rangers of Numidia were upon their quarry. Stills somehow had got himself up on the shoddy roof above the huge beast, and down he flew like a bird tucked to hunt. Dagger below him. The blow struck true, and he was mounted atop the finned horror, knife buried in scaly skull. At the same instant, Helm's axe beheaded the 4th guard, and the battle-axers came closing in. Howling, swinging its webbed arms, the fish thing was far from defeated. Its claws found Stills, ripped him from its back, and then spun. From the mushy mess of the skewered guards it yanked that massive arrow. The lesser fiend slumped over, but still not dead. The arrow then it plunged into the cuirass of one of Grey Elk's men, and he met his end. But the thing was stupid and leaned in to gloat. Up through its chin and into the brain pan that man's axe haft pierced. Gods, what a blow! And with his last bloody breath delivered. There was a moment of pause. A weird, over-too-soon instant. Zymer emerged from nearby cover, Foxy appearing at his side, and then through the awkward quiet, laughter. Deep, slow, insidious laughter from within the longhouse. Helm retrieved his axe. Stills gained his feet, and the company assembled. The laughter ebbed.
"I've been expecting you, my apprentice."
An unnatural voice came from seemingly every direction.
"You and your friends are welcome here. No need for blood. Please, enter."
Zymer met eyes with his company, took a breath, hands went to weapons, and they followed the old man forward. Behind them, gods if they had only noticed, the great towering fish beast and its 4 companions, even the headless one, slowly rose to their feet. Plodding, sloppy, slow, shuffling, they returned to their patrol routes like ants with brain rot. It was a sight from a bad dream, there in the low mist of first light, thick with sorcery's vibrations.
"We are not here."
The voice was Garrett Frax. The warlock stood, robed in tarred burlap, at the center of the longhouse. Beside him, a 4-foot pike was stuck, and at its top, a grisly, disembodied head. It blinked.
"We are not anywhere, are we, old friend?"
With that, Frack turned to Zymer, ignoring the entourage behind him. The hut was warm with dawn's glow, and corner sconces burned bright. The peat floor was tamped smooth by the prints of 10,000 tiny feet. But Frack was alone, save the head. "We've enough of your madness, demon," Zymer answered, standing firm and opening the brass latches of his spellbook with intense, slow care. "You know we've come to stop this devilry. Enough have died."
"Died?"
Frack retorted.
"How ironic to lay the woes of death on one who would rid our world of its presence. I bring life, old sage."
He walked casually around the head pole, fiddling with the stringy, greasy hair as he spoke. Frack was an odd-looking man with sunken cheekbones and no eyebrows at all. His locks he had cropped with an angular cut right across the top. Rings cluttered every one of his fingers.
Look here what wonders await us."
He gestured to the head. The face was partly obscured by long hair. Zymer paged his book without notice, an index finger locating the syllables. He was ready. Then Frack parted the head's locks aside, revealing the entire horrid face. It was impossible. It was the head of none other than Frack himself. Helm's eyes narrowed. Stills was at the rear, rubbing sore ribs when he noticed their fallen foes had returned to life. Then, even worse, he saw the Axeman, the dead one, his face slashed, stumbling about off in the swamp. "What illusion is this?" Grey Elk cursed, spitting into the loam.
"No illusion, Grey Elk of Numidia,"
Frack answered, giggling. The head acknowledged him, looking around in a blasphemous imitation of life. "I am not here," it said. "We are not anywhere." It smiled, gurgling. The voice crackled with wrong, and the hairs stood at every mortal neck. "You're too late, heroes. The scar has been opened." "To the black with this," Grey Elk interrupted. He lunged forward, drawing longsword. This he held afore like a lance, and fell with his weight into Frack. The steel slid right through, red on the other side, and they both stumbled but kept their feet. Frack looked down at the mortal wound, then up into Grey Elk's eyes, and gods, he grinned a grin no storyteller should put in words. "Grey Elk, you fool! No!" Zymer protested, but things were in motion. Frack lifted a snake-like hand to Grey Elk's forehead, the two still struggling with the blade, and from this writhing hand a purple sparking wreath of mage fire bloomed. It arced and crackled, blasting the huge man away from the robed figure like a doll. Onto the mud floor Grey Elk fell and met a pitiful end. His head and chest smoldered, melted into a shapeless mush of ash and seared death. At this, the remaining axe men and stills engaged the guards and fish thing once again. This time they hacked to bits, chopped and disjointed their foes. Even reanimated, these ruins of flesh would have no hope of fighting, and it was grim work. Helm took 3 cautious steps forward, wary of Grey Elk's fate. He met Frack's eyes, all 4 of them, and the slits of his helmet made a dire scene of it all. "It ends now, Frack," Zymer called. "Asorum Ancrio detonate!" Zymer's spell was invisible, but clearly staggered the warlock. His robes flew to one side, but he laughed, froze, then exploded. His body simply burst. It was not gore or stringy ribbons that blasted outward, but dark ash and charcoal pebbles. The room was dusted with it all. And then the laughter echoed again. Helm saw this, amazed, and turned to join the melee at the hut entrance. Through limb and bone did they hack and fight until it was done. "Well fought, heroes," the head mocked. "Can you defeat all the ranks of hell?" With that, the air in the longhouse shook, and from shadowy tears in thin air the Sahagwin appeared. It was as before, glyph-marked fishmen from some dark dimension. In a few seconds, no less than 24 of them filled the lumpy hall, closing in on the rangers. Helm waded into them, Stills and the fearless axemen at his sides. It was a battle for the ages, and somewhere Valkyries sing of it, for both the Numidian men fell and met their deaths there. For each demon slain, 2 more materialized from thin air, and laughter ever spreading, otherworldly, filled the room. Zymer was pinned down in one corner of the hall, and his allies, only Helm and Stills yet fighting, held him safe. He looked outside, hoping to find escape, but the damned fishy demons were crowding there too. The sky flickered with sorcery, changed to the sky of some other realm. Or another time, the swamp jittered and changed as the dimensions mixed. "Damn it, Freck! End this madness!" Zymer gathered his courage, stood and raised his spellbook high. The hour was desperate. Seeing this, the Sagwin, all spiny, greenish, each with a crude little pike and mouth as big as head, rushed the wizard. They pressed in. Stills popped above the fray like a cork on a geyser, doing a backflip and tossing one iron ball bomb into the mob. 2 demons jumped it, being blown to bits but containing the blast. Helm was scoured in 100 cuts and gouges, and so Zymer began the spell to end them all. To pay his toll for assisting this dark god in the first place, absolution would cost them all their lives, but it would end. And then, a good thing happened. A right thing that only selfless friendship can ever explain. Foxy, that wide-hearted wild thing, came flying from a crumbly break in one muddy wall. Across the space she flew, legs like a bounding hare, and caught in her teeth the greasy hair of that awful head. From its pike she tore it, landing at the far side of the longhouse, and shaking her head side to side like a pit bull. The head flapped and sprayed red, even a tooth went tumbling. The laughter abated, but the hair came ripping, and she lost her jaw's grip. But the Rangers of Numidia are a company of kin, and never fight for glory, but as a team. Foxy turned her shrewd little eyes to Stills, who stood feet on shoulders on the demon crowd like a jester. He caught her meaning, and with one motion drew his shortbow, knocked and loosed one little dart. "Hee-haw!" he cried, tumbling from his perch with the effort. The Sagwin closed in around him for the kill. But the dart flew true, and into the teeth of the head it gobbed with a hard whack. This jammed the jaw and ragged tongue of the Frack's head, and it could no longer laugh, it could no longer speak, and at that instant, the the Sahagwin began to vanish. In puffs of red smoke, or crushing into spiral infinity, they vanished. Some simply slumped to heaps of skin and bone like discarded cloaks. The fight was over. Helm collapsed. By that afternoon, fire had consumed the longhouse, and the wet quiet of the bogs was returning. Grey Elk and his men were put to rest in stone cairns, trees cleared round. The rangers there stood after their work, helm and stills battered, but upright, leaning with injuries. Zymer spoke.
Here rest Grey Elk and kin, saviors all. Great men who pushed death back from our realm.
He gestured with one hand.
Udin, we ask not to take time from the cosmos to bless us, nor to think we equals to walk side by side in life or death, but be generous with your glow, All-Father, and let these souls dine forever at the great feast in your warmth. This we ask on the bond of our deeds, and earn their seats with our memory of their valor.
All present nodded with solemn ache. Is it over, old friend? Helm asked, removing his chestplate with a wince.
I fear not, Spearman.
Zymer looked skyward.
We are not here. What did he mean by that? A sorcerer of this scale is not defeated by gobbing a laughing head. I saw something changing in the swamp during the battle. We've more work to do if this realm be safe.
Then what next?
We return to Westburg and finish our duty to our townsfolk. We rebuild and we prepare for whatever strange war that demon has in waiting.
Stills shook his head, wrapping one arm with a linen bandage, leaning against Foxy.
I'm hungry.
Thank you for tuning in to this transmission of Runehammer, all things cognitive, creative, and imaginative. This is Brandish Gilhelm signing off.